While indie grandpa Jeff Vogel is already thinking about which game he'd like to revisit by the time he retires,
we're older than the World Wide Web.
There's also still one last series receiving releases which are entirely new. I'm talking about Queen's Wish, a series which was started in 2019 and which was also the first one where Spiderweb tried its luck on Kickstarter. In August 2021, Vogel returned to Kickstarter to collect money for his successor, Queen's Wish 2, The Tormentor. He ended up with respectable $66,000 US, which is significantly less than the almost $99,000 he got for the first part, but still a nice advancement payment and starting help for the new project of his basically one-man company. And with the track record this guy has, you also didn't need to worry about whether the project would actually result in a finished game. Just 1 year later, in August of 2022, he already completed and released the game. Over the last few months, I played through the game in its entirety, and in this review I will tell you what to expect from it and where the differences are from its predecessor. Before you are wondering, I will already start with my biggest criticism right away. Besides of the main menu, intro and outro, this new game from Spiderweb, like the others before, does not feature any music. Additionally, the music from the main menu can't be used here on YouTube. So what you will hear in the background now is some royalty-free music by the great Kevin MacLeod. In Queen's Wish 2, we once again play the son or daughter of the most powerful woman in the known world, Queen Sharon III. She rules over the realm of Haven with a strict hand, but the more her mysterious illness progresses, the more things she wants to have done before her inevitable end has come. While in the first game she sends us right away to conquer and rebuild an entire continent, this time our mission was supposed to be just routine and a formality. Together with our brother Sutter, we are sent to the realm of the Rukai, a warlike people with archaic traditions, and also the people of our deceased father. However, the Rukai Empire is in a state of turmoil, and during our visit we get attacked by a group of rebel raiders. While we beat the group back without much of a problem, it becomes clear now that our visit to the leaders of the Rukai and our installed governors will probably be more than just a routine visit. The world design of the predecessor felt quite artificial and constructed. It had 3 basically perfectly symmetrical wings, each of which containing a region of the continent, and of course we started our reconquest where all these 3 wings were melting together. In comparison, the world in Queen's Wish 2 feels much more organic. While you have 3 different main regions again, each with 2 cities and 2 of old fortifications, they are much more intertwined now and also differ more in regards to the design of the quests. For example, not every one of our 3 governors is incompetent and needs to be replaced, even though we can decide to do that anyways. The encounters with the local leaders of the Rukai will also be very different, but I don't want to spoil anything here. So overall, I like the design of the world, which feels much more believable than in the previous game. We also have our magical mirrors again, which allow our siblings and mother to reach out to us to give us advice on how we should act and what decisions we should make. And of course it's our choice again whether we want to follow them when we are confronted with the numerous decisions. Speaking of decisions, Queen's Wish is the first series from Spiderweb where decisions are carried over from game to game, which happens in the form of a code we receive at the end of the first part, and which leads to some dialogues changing slightly. And once we finish Queen's Wish 2, we will also receive another code, which will then influence the third game. Queen's Wish 2 is packed with choices, which will also have significant consequences in the game's story, which will also influence what the ending of the game will be like. However, they won't usually cause any major changes in the actual gameplay, unless we decide, for example, that as a royal we should not accept the final challenge of the Rukai and instead just return home and declare the matter as resolved. Now, you might think that you're alone with the main character, and the game largely acts like this was the case. But in fact you're running around with up to 3 companions. These are not characters which are somehow integrated into the story, but generic henchmen that you can create at any time in a fort from up to 4 available cultures. Except for the Heavenites, each of them have 3 learnable special abilities. Newly created characters are then simply set to the level of the main character, and you can freely distribute their talent points in the classless system. The system is kept quite simple, and about halfway through the game it becomes kinda meaningless, as you just have too many points to distribute, but at least it doesn't get in the way of the game. We will now explore the lands of the Rukai with our prince or princess and the 3 henchmen and fulfill quests. many of which are optional, and even the main quest is split into different strands, which you can do in parallel, which gives us a lot of freedom in what we want to do next. A core aspect that also plays into the quests are our old fortresses, which we will claim for ourselves the first time we visit them. These fortresses serve multiple purposes. Our group will be healed there, and so they act as some kind of resting places. But we are also able to expand them so that they will provide additional bonuses and better equipment, for example. And in order to expand them, we need resources, which we get through quests. For example, we are sent to ruins which are supposed to be disassembled for building material and are currently haunted by some ghosts we need to drive out. If we complete the quest, we get the building material and can use it for a new building in our fortress. An important difference to Queen's Wish 1 is that we do not accumulate resources anymore. So when we get 2 units of stone each day and don't use them, they don't stack up. The accumulation in the first game basically meant that it was most efficient to not use any of them at first and to just gather a huge amount, and then finally build everything in one go. In Queen's Wish 2, this issue has been corrected with this new system. The interface, on the other hand, reflects this in the sense that it feels like a patchwork of old and new. There is still the old daily resource report, which doesn't make any sense anymore. The buildings we got already are displayed in the menu where we create new characters, and our resources can be viewed in different character screens. While the interface as a whole does work, it's somewhat irritating at first. All the info is there, but you have to know in which unrelated screen you can find it. While we are traveling between cities or are on our way to the next dungeon, we are seeing our group from a somewhat further zoomed out perspective on the world map. So we are exploring the world in this scale first, but we can still stumble on smaller events there. Like we can find some bandit camp or wolf dens, which always seem to be abandoned first until we want to leave them again and then get ambushed by the inhabitants. But we will also have a few dialogues with farmers and travelers in this view. If we are in a city or dungeon, however, then we will see our group in a scale that we know from other games like Baldur's Gate. Unlike Baldur's Gate or other Spiderweb games, however, the developer decided against a typical slanted isometric perspective in the Queen's Wish series. Instead, we see everything just from the front, looking at it in a straight line, which makes the game seem like it was made with something like the RPG Maker tool, which in turn makes the already very simplistic graphics appear even cheaper. In this view, we got most dialogues, but also the turn-based combat, which we can trigger freely at any time, which can often give us a tactical advantage at the start of the battle. The combat system works with action points, but attacks and most abilities cost all of the remaining points. So we can usually move and then attack, but not the other way around. The battles are varied and often tactically challenging on a high difficulty level. Both melee fighters and mages can use their mana or energy for a number of different skills and spells, such as typical damage spells, heals, buffs, and so on. One thing which stands out a bit is the mind control spell, which is so powerful that you can often use it to turn the whole fight around very easily. This also means that battles where this is an option are usually significantly easier than others, and that you sometimes have to rely on save scumming so that the first mind control spell doesn't fail. Presumably it would have been better in regards to balancing if the duration of the mind control was shorter, but nevertheless I would describe the combat as overall mostly enjoyable. Even though boss fights usually don't come close to the quality you can find in Avernum Escape from the Pit. We are encouraged to solve the battles as efficiently as possible, as our healing potions are severely limited. And even though we do regenerate a tiny bit of mana after each fight, we would use a lot more if we went all out, casting lots of spells, using tons of heals, basically leaving us without resources before we reach the end of the dungeon. And in the Queen's Wish series, this means that we'd have to do it all over again, because if you don't manage to finish the dungeon in one go, most enemies will just reappear once you come back for a second attempt. I guess this can be frustrating for some players, and also if you don't know about it beforehand, but it also means that maximizing each fight makes it a little more interesting, and the dungeons, which are usually about 45 minutes long, can be seen as a challenge as a whole, rather than just individual special fights sandwiched between trash battles. Another thing which some players might not like is the level scaling of the opponents. While our enemies can have a much higher level than our own characters, they can never be more than one level below them. However, an upscaled enemy still remains quite easy, and the health points stay quite low. It seems like the scaling mostly serves the purpose to ensure that some combat formulas are still working, such as the enemy's hit chance. Unfortunately, it's not clearly visible whether you got an upscaled enemy in front of you or one which got that level natively. In terms of difficulty, I'd say that the beginning is actually the hardest section of the game, and the second half of the game is clearly easier than the first one. However, if you play on easier difficulties, that might not be as apparent as on the hardest, which at the beginning is quite brutal, as you might know from other Spiderweb games. There are no secret passages, hidden switches or destructible walls like in Avernum, but you will come across gemstone puzzles here and there, a small logic minigame. And once solved, these open a gate for additional loot, and in one case it's also necessary for one optional quest. With around 10 of these puzzles in the entire game, they make for a nice change without getting on your nerves. And so we will gradually explore the lands of the Rukai, complete quests, collect resources and use them to expand our fortresses, and in the process improve our party so that we can advance into deeper regions. And besides of the materials for expanding the fort, we will also find other crafting materials. While there's no deep crafting system in the game, and honestly they work rather poorly in most games anyways, you can pay the scholars a visit and then exchange these materials to unlock new skills, potions and items. A nice additional layer that enriches the game without making it overly complex. As usual, this game from Spiderweb is also pretty much bug-free, which doesn't mean that everything is super polished. I mentioned the patchwork interface already, and the pathfinding is certainly also no highlight. And in one quest I was able to do the steps in the wrong order. Mechanically the quest still worked, but it was a bit weird to see an NPC reappear after I killed it already. The graphics certainly make a cheapish impression, even though I quickly got used to the perspective change in the predecessor already. My biggest point of criticism is actually once again the music, or rather the absence of it. As mentioned at the beginning, what you heard here in the background is not part of the game. There's only silence and a few atmospheric loops. The developer argues that it would be better if everyone just used their own music, but I'd call that nonsense, since it's up to the developer to create the atmosphere. And as a player, you don't know beforehand which type of track you are supposed to start now, and even if you did, you wouldn't change the music track manually each time a combat starts, would you? In terms of the overall rating, it strongly depends on how much of a deal the absence of any background music is for you. Maybe you play games without music usually anyways, and rather listen to some techno or doom metal in the background, who knows? Due to the revision of the resource and fort expansion mechanics and the now much more organic world, I would rate Queen's Wish 2 as better than its predecessor. However, it doesn't come close to my favorite Spiderweb game, Avernum Escape from the Pit. I give the game a 3/4 thumbs up, just slightly before the full thumbs up, mostly because of the lack of music, which is not compensated with any other element, which is done outstandingly well. The game has a well-written and down-to-earth story without drowning the player in walls of text. There's a simple character system which is enriched by multiple other systems, and it offers combat which isn't super complex but offers enough depth to stay interesting. You need to be okay with having to bring your own music though, and you also need to be fine with seeing dungeons as enclosed challenges, which I personally don't see as an issue, but I'm pretty sure of this being a deal breaker for some players. The normal price for Queen's Wish 2 is currently €21 or $25, which is a fair price even without a sale. While you don't need to have played the predecessor to enjoy this second part, and I rate the second one higher than the first, I'd still recommend to play them in the correct order, to dive deeper into the world and to get all the references and to import the decisions. Yes, it may only have a cosmetic impact, but you still don't want to be frustrated later on that you didn't go about it in the right order. So much for Queen's Wish 2, The Tormentor. I hope that I've been able to give you a good overview of the game, and if that's the case, then I'd appreciate if you could leave a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel if you aren't subbed already. That way I can also see that it makes sense to create these English versions of my reviews. Thank you for watching. I'm going to have another go at this boss here, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye. Well then, Druid Largeman. What the hell? That's not fair. Let's try it a little bit differently. Yeah, shit. Nah, he will probably die now. No!